episode of Made in America is brought to you by America's Inventor Lady and Home Talk USA. Home Talk is a proud member of the King's Broadcasting Network, which has been bringing you the best in home-based innovation since 1998.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us for this episode of Made in America.
This segment is brought to you by the law offices of R.P. Baraska. RPB law offices have been bringing corporate-level legal expertise to the independent inventor community for more than 20 years. For all your inventing legal needs, trust rpblawoffices.com.
This is the Chairman's Countdown with your host, Zach Mottl, Chairman of the Coalition for a Prosperous America. Count down with us as we explore trade, tariffs, and industrial strategy with the leaders driving America's prosperity and security.
I'm your host, Zach Mottl, and we are here coming to you on Home Talk USA Radio Network. We are streaming live at hometalkusa.com and all across America on your AM radio. My pleasure to have a great show up for you today. Again, I'm the chairman of the Coalition for a Prosperous America. We are the only group exclusively representing domestic producers across America in the sectors of manufacturing, farming, ranching, and labor. And we are working hard in Washington, D.C. on behalf of producers to bring production back to America. For today's show, we've got two of the top minds that work at the Coalition for the Prosperous America. We've got Andrew Reichenberg, he's the CPA economist, and Chuck Benoit, he's the CPA general counsel and trade lawyer. They're both right at the center of CPA's work on supply chains, on foreign investment, and on America's industrial revival. And some of the subjects we're going to talk to you about today, it's in the news. It's hot right now. Beef. Where's the beef? And where's the medicine, too, while we're at it? These are things that we have become reliant on imports in America. And in the news, we heard the president initiated an investigation on beef, on the meatpacking industry. There was a little bit of concern that, ranchers in America were charging too much money, but the truth came out, and actually they are hurting by foreign imports, and more imports don't help us get more beef in America. So we'll talk more about that, and we'll talk more about medicine and why it's important to have our medical supply chain in America. So, Andrew, I know that you recently testified before the Senate Special Committee on Aging, and in the hearing, you warned a little bit about what's going on in the U.S. drug supply chain and, quite frankly, how it's become a systemic breakdown. What's going on? What's behind all of this?
Thanks, Zach, and thanks for having me on this week. And the main thing that I highlighted in the Senate testimony is how big of an impact we're having from imports, specifically from both China and India for U.S. generic drugs. The main problem is both on the Chinese side, they are really dominating in this base pharmaceutical ingredient space. And then India itself is reliant on China. And then India finalizes the drug production, and we are very reliant on India for these final generic drugs. And so our entire supply chain for generic drugs in the U.S. is really tied up in these foreign economies. And we have very little control over the safety processing here, very little control over the supply chain. And we've become extremely reliant not only on these countries in general, but also on specific producers within these countries. And the imports are coming in, and they're really undercutting U.S. producers, forcing prices to unsustainable levels and forcing U.S. companies out of business. And we're losing jobs. We're losing critical manufacturing capabilities for these really critical drugs.
I think people don't always realize, Andrew, how important these generic drugs are. Ones that we don't think about. They're not on TV. They're not the name brands. They're not the big commercials that we see. These are the drugs that, every single ambulance in every emergency room has about 300 key generic drugs that they can't function without. You want to put a ventilator on, there's a drug cocktail that they give. And so these aren't sexy. They're not expensive. And typically what we're talking about when we offshore these drugs, it sounds like it's often less than a penny a pill. Now, everybody I know is not paying less for their health care. Whatever you're paying for your health care in America, you're probably paying more. And it seems like, there's some disconnect here. We're not getting the good jobs and we're not getting the national security. I know that we saw during the pandemic where certain countries decided they were going to keep medicines for themselves. So, we are in a really precarious position right now, not having the basic ingredients and the basic drugs that we need for our medical needs. But, one of the most alarming parts I saw in your testimony was how many essential medicines are reliant on these single source foreign suppliers. What is the implication of that, these single source suppliers, and how did we get there?
Yes, this is the direct cause of the current supply chain instability in the U.S. and the shortages that we're seeing. And as you highlighted, generics are not necessarily a sexy topic. All of the big focus is always on the big brand name drugs, but in fact, generics are 90% of U.S. prescriptions. And so this is really the blood of our entire healthcare system. And it's really vulnerable to these single suppliers. For example, many of our drugs rely on not only single countries coming from China or India, for example, but often most of our supply is coming from a single factory. And a great example of this is Intas Pharmaceuticals in India. In 2023, the FDA shut down this facility after it discovering a cascade of different failures, included shredded documents, acid dose documents, hiding falsified test data. And this is really just a snapshot into the many different failures we're seeing with safety and sanitary conditions in these foreign factories that the FDA has very little oversight over. And when they are shut down, or whenever there is an accident that happens, whether due to COVID or different supply issues, what we see is a collapse in U.S. supply because we're so over-reliant. For example, this Intas Pharmaceutical closure, which manufactures cisplatin, which is critical for chemotherapy, they produced about 50% of our entire cisplatin supply for the entire country. And so when this was shut off, hospitals had to ration care, they had to delay treatment, and this results in much, much worse health outcomes for U.S. patients. And this is especially terrible for vulnerable patients such as those taking chemotherapy, elderly people, or really any patient that needs this treatment. It's immediately bad medical care for these people that are delayed. You have to do secondary care, and it's devastating across the system.
Yeah, Andrew, you have picked up on a huge thing on how these quality issues are there. I know, a lot of your work has been on the more economic side of it, but I've seen these quality failures, and the public has seen them too. Our listeners, this, how many drugs have been pulled? Blood pressure medication, heparin contamination, antacids were contaminated. Zantac, a couple of years back got pulled because it had carcinogens in them. And so I think people don't realize about how much bad medicine is in their medicine cabinet. And this is stuff I don't know, very few people don't take at least one pill in one way, whether it's an allergy medicine or something like a chemotherapy drug, right? And so we are all affected by this, the lack of the quality, the lack of oversight. And, at CPA, we represent a lot of domestic generic drug manufacturers, and they're upset because the FDA can show up as they should, unannounced, do a full inspection and get right to the data. When it's overseas, frequently what we used to have was they called ahead and scheduled ahead, so it allowed for what you documented, data being shredded and disappearing and cover-ups. I mean, it's just not a way for a nation like America, right, a world superpower dependent on this third world drug manufacturing, giving us substandard products that frankly aren't saving anybody any money. But you started to touch on it and how this offshoring, it's hollowed out our supply chain so much to the point that we have these shortages, right? We can't even get medicine. I mean, what's going on with that? And from a national security standpoint, right, this isn't just a healthcare problem, is it?
No, this is the core reason behind the shortages. It's not just the import reliance, but it's these cheap imports that are coming in, undercutting U.S. businesses and forcing them out of the market entirely. And what this is doing is it's creating a huge shortage in U.S. production where we don't have enough domestic capacity anymore for a lot of these critical drugs to be able to produce them in a crisis. And so this is exactly what happened during COVID whenever other countries were restricting their supply to the U.S. and we had all these shortages of different medical equipment, different drugs. And this can become a geopolitical issue with a country like China, but it often can just be because of an emergency. For example, India, which is not necessarily a geopolitical adversary, they had to cut off supply to the U.S. because they had their own market to care for. What we need to have domestic U.S. production. And it's also important to note that these cheap imports that we've become reliant on from places like India, they're also lower quality. Studies have shown that Indian drugs have a 55% higher rate of adverse events than U.S.-made generics. And so
That's right.
we're not even getting good bang for our buck.
No, we're not, Andrew. We're not getting the jobs. We're not getting the national security. This is no way for a country like America to be run. And, people say, well, like you mentioned, India, they're not a geopolitical rival necessarily, but this is not about friends and allies. This is about national security. This is about making sure that we can take care of our soldiers in a time of conflict and our people in a time of crisis, and that we have the right quality for our drugs. Now, I know we've got a few minutes left before the break, but what about costs, right? If we bring this drug manufacturing back home and we have billions of dollars, we represent a lot of producers who are ready to make major investments in America, billions of dollars, maybe even trillions when you add them all up, in terms of creating drug supply in America and employing Americans. Is this going to raise the cost for consumers? Is this going to make medical prices go up or not? What do you think?
Not at all. And that's the main important factor to remember here, that manufacturing, the actual cost of making the drug, is tiny compared to what the drug's final price is, the price that you'd pay in the pharmacy or the price that hospitals pay. And the reason behind this is that the middlemen, the PBM, the wholesalers, insurance, pharmacies, they capture 2/3 of the drug's final cost. And so that means any added cost to bring production back to the U.S. is only a few pennies per the dollar compared to the middleman margins. And these middleman margins have not been passed on to consumers either. And so Medicare and Medicaid will also automatically adjust. And the real cost really comes from when we have these shortages. Hospitals see 300 to 500% markups, and that's where the real cost happens. And it's also a national security cost. The DOT doesn't even know.
People dying, literally dying. This is a life and death issue. And I think we can all agree there's a lot of reforms needed in healthcare, and we got to get the middlemen out, but we got to get the national security first. We got to get the medicine made here, the safety and the security. So we're going to take a quick break. Again, here we are on Home Talk USA Radio. This is the Chairman's Countdown, and we'll be back with you in just a few minutes right here at HomeTalkUSA.com and all across America. Don't touch your dial. Thank you for being here with us.
This segment of Invent America TV is brought to you by SearchQuest Patent Search. SearchQuest provides for a comprehensive patent search that searches the entire world and not just the U.S. Patent Office. Make sure that before you spend those big bucks having a patent written, you've done your due diligence by getting a comprehensive patent search. Use SearchQuestPatents.com for all your patent search needs. They scour the world for you.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Chairman's Countdown. I'm your host, Zach Mottl, coming to you right here on Home Talk USA Radio Network, and we are streaming live at HomeTalkUSA.com all across America. Before the break, we were talking with Andrew Reichenberg, our economist at the Coalition for a Prosperous America. We got into a little bit about what's going on with the generic drug supply chain and why it's not here in America, why it needs to be. But now we want to get into where's the beef. As I mentioned earlier, beef has been in the news as prices have risen quite a bit, and there was some noise made that American ranchers might be charging too much money. But quite frankly, that's not the case, and we've now seen the data. The ranchers, people who raise the cattle here in America, they're getting paid less and less, but you're paying more and more at the grocery store. What's going on here? Well, a lot of people have started to zero in on the big four meatpackers in America, and we've got Andrew here to help us unpack the whole beef issue. So, Andrew, your new beef report, it's getting a lot of attention. What did you uncover in this about foreign influence and the concentration in the beef industry?
So it's no surprise that the U.S. is having very, very high beef prices recently, and these prices have increased massively over the past year. But it's important to really look at who's benefiting from these higher prices. And ranchers are not seeing any of this benefit. All the benefits are going towards consolidation in the meatpacking sector. As you alluded to, there are 4 major meatpacker companies, and they control about an 80 to 85% market share. And what these meatpackers are doing is they're pitting U.S. ranchers against low-cost imports in order to lower prices paid to ranchers. So they're trying to make U.S. ranchers pay basically developing country prices, prices that you'd pay to Mexican ranchers, Argentina ranchers, while at the same time, they're using this concentrated market power to raise prices at the grocery store to U.S. consumers. And USDA data confirms this, that there is a growing margin between what's actually paid to ranchers and what's paid in the grocery store. And the meat packers are capturing all of this margin. And the main reason why the prices are rising as well is that the import supply is becoming unstable and is becoming import dependent. We're at the lowest cattle herd since 1951. And so our cattle ranchers have been being forced out of business. They're not benefiting, and we're having a much lower domestic supply, which is leading to higher prices as well.
It's terrible. And, cattle ranching is a business kind of like manufacturing, where you have a lot of family businesses, multi-generational families and in the business, and they pass it down. And it's kind of, it's what your dad did. It's what you do. Your mom helps, it's a whole family enterprise. It's really a wonderful, wonderful business model that we'd like to encourage more of in America. But the way we've got it set up with this oligopoly with the meat packers, certainly the consumer is not benefiting. And certainly the families and the businesses in America are not benefiting either. And, we got to get around that. And I know, there's been, cases before, and I know my rancher friends also, one of the things they want is this country of origin labeling on their beef as well. They'd like, when you go to the grocery store, to be able to know, was this beef raised in Mexico or was it raised in America? And the way the system is right now, the consumer can't tell the difference. So, this is one solution, but we've also got to get at this meat packer oligopoly. What do you see as you look at the beef supply chain? We talked about some of the vulnerabilities that we're seeing with pharmaceuticals, this heavy foreign influence, consolidation, pressure on the domestic producers. Is it the same kind of thing going on here, right? That it's almost the same as pharmaceuticals, industry after industry, right?
Exactly. And what we're seeing is the two main causes of these problems across different sectors is, number one, the middlemen who are pitting U.S. producers against imports to lower prices paid to U.S. actual producers, while at the same time raising prices for consumers at the end, where these middlemen who add very little value are capturing more and more of the profit. And then the second issue that's happening is that our supply is becoming unstable, whether it's due to issues at foreign pharma plants or for cattle, for example. There was a Mexican ringworm outbreak that caused us to cut imports from Mexico completely, and we don't control that supply. So it's this unstable supply and these middlemen who are capturing more and more of the margins at the expense of people who are actually producing these goods.
Thank you, Andrew, for all the work you've done in this sector, both in pharmaceutical and in beef. The things that you're uncovering and the data that you're providing to decision makers, they seem to constantly point to broad themes that we deal with all the time here at the Coalition for a Prosperous America: concentration, offshoring, too much foreign leverage, and quite frankly, the need to reverse all of that and rebuild the domestic capacity, both for better pricing. I know affordability is top of mind for people right now, and it's affecting elections. And I know, our president wants to talk about that and work on that. I think there's a lot we can do to increase the affordability as well as getting the good jobs. Besides, lowering costs, if we can raise people's wages broadly faster than costs, that's a wonderful thing too. That solves the problem as well. So, we can get at it both ways. Some of the stuff the president's doing, this investigation with the meat packers, is just getting started, but Congress can do their part too, help restore country of origin labeling on beef and pork. And certainly there's a lot Congress can do with healthcare reform and with helping to bring the generic drug supply back to America. So I hope we see some of those changes coming up soon. And to our listeners, call your congressperson, let them know about this, call your representative, send a letter, send an email. They want to hear from you. Your voice matters. So please get involved. But, another issue that we talk about here all the time, I want to pivot a little bit to investment in America. I'd love to see more investment in generic drugs, but I want to see it coming from the right places, right? And unfortunately, in the headlines quite a bit lately, we've been talking about Chinese investment in America. And, one of the biggest themes in your research, Andrew, is the rise of Chinese investment inside the United States. And where is Chinese investment flowing right now? Agriculture, biotech, real estate, manufacturing? Because right at the root of it, we don't mind investment. We don't mind foreign companies coming, but these are countries of concern. This is China, the communist country that has, made it very clear they are not our friends. And, we wouldn't let North Korea come and open a factory here, but we seem to have let China buy up land, buy up buildings, buy up factories, buy up companies. And the same way they're subsidizing business overseas, now they're going to do it from within our own walls. They're going to subsidize and put American producers out of business. The end result isn't good. What are you seeing, Andrew? What does the data show?
Exactly. And what we're seeing is the two main causes of these problems across different sectors is, number one, the middlemen who are pitting U.S. producers against imports to lower prices paid to U.S. actual producers, while at the same time raising prices for consumers at the end, where these middlemen who add very little value are capturing more and more of the profit. And then the second issue that's happening is that there is a growing margin between what's actually paid to ranchers and what's paid in the grocery store. And the meat packers are capturing all of this margin. And Yeah, when you ask where is the Chinese investment flowing, the answer is really all of the above. And it's especially concerning when it's happening in all of these sectors that are under Section 232 investigation. And these are specific sectors the U.S. government is investigating because they are of national security importance. But what we're seeing is that this Chinese investment is coming in to all of these different sectors across the economy, setting up shop in the U.S. And then at the end of the day, we're still reliant on China. And a lot of the times they're coming in, especially when you look at examples like with solar, that these Chinese companies come in and they might do final assembly in the United States, but it's being done with Chinese components, with Chinese tech, with Chinese IP. A lot of the benefits are still flowing to China. We're not actually building our own capacity, and it's still flowing back to China at the end of the day. So this is something we really need to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I know there's concerns about, spying what's going on at these factories and what other goods are they bringing in or making or under the cover importing, could be radioactive, dangerous things, coming in here. What's happening next door? We have a battery plant here in Illinois, Goshen. And listen, the Chinese Communist Party already subsidizes the industry and steals business left and right from true free market economies. We don't need to let them do it here. But even worse, we don't need to give them our taxpayer dollars on the solar thing, on the battery thing. In Illinois, we gave, the taxpayers funded a Chinese Communist Party company $500 million. There's companies that have been here, mine, for example, over 100 years. We didn't get that kind of special treatment. So I think it's just disgusting that we're doing this. It's bad for our jobs, bad for our national security. But we've got to take a quick break coming up here. Again, we're coming to you on Home Talk USA radio network. This is the Chairman's Countdown. I'm your host, Zach Mottl. And right after the break, we're going to talk a little bit about policy and enforcement with Charles Benoit. So I'm excited to get to that and possibly talk about some more solutions for these problems that we've covered with Andrew. Andrew, thank you so much for being with us today.
If you're an inventor or you know an inventor out there who would just like to be able to have a conversation with other inventors, join the Inventors Roundtable. It's free. The meetings are virtual, so you can be anywhere in America and talk to another inventor. And for a lot of folks out there, understanding the process, being able to ask questions, getting good service provider information is critical to the inventing process. So, got questions? Want to join? It's free. inventorsroundtable.org.
Good day, everyone. Welcome back. You're here with the Chairman's Countdown. I'm your host, Zach Mottl, Chairman of the Coalition for a Prosperous America, representing American producers across America here. And we're talking about policy and procedure that can help make America more prosperous, strong, and secure. We're streaming to you live at hometalkusa.com all across America. Earlier, we were talking with Andrew Reichenberg, CPA's economist, about some beef and generic drug supply chain issues and how we can make them better for America. And Andrew has done a lot of research and given a lot of testimony, a lot of data on these things. We've got Charles Benoit. He's our trade counsel at the Coalition for Prosperous America. Charles, great to be with you today. Thanks for taking the time. Andrew's data raises some serious policy questions. What are the biggest gaps in the U.S. law when it comes to foreign investment in these areas here?
Yeah, so important question, but I'd almost even rephrase it. It's the gaps are everything, and it's almost like, where do we have any tool to counter the Chinese foreign investment? So America is we've been the most open country when it comes to physical merchandise coming through the ports, right? Like, we had the lowest tariffs of any country. We're the dumping ground to the world. But say what you will about that problem, we actually did always have the infrastructure to fix that pretty quickly, as President Trump is showing, right? Like, the infrastructure to impose tariffs was there. It just required the political will. When it comes to foreign investment, that's a way trickier problem, I'm sorry to report. We're the most open country in the world, and pretty much no other country, if you're a foreigner, can you even start a corporation, right? In America, you can start up a Delaware LLC, or you can incorporate without even stepping foot into the U.S. or having any presence here. All you need is, if you've got a Visa, a credit card number, you're off to the races. The IRS will hand you an EIN number, a taxpayer number, and you've got a U.S. business. It's totally crazy. So
Nobody does this. In Mexico, I have to have a Mexican partner to start a business. I can't buy land in most countries as a foreigner. I mean, it's unbelievable that we do this. We are uniquely unprotected, aren't we?
absolutely, it's something where really, like in corporate law, even the states need to come together, and we need to start to harmonize, because we do have this kind of a race to the bottom situation, right? Where you got 50 states you can choose to incorporate in, and it has been a bit of a race to the bottom. We did you used to have actually like capital requirements and things like that. Now it's you got a credit card number, $50. Hire a registered agent. Here's your company. So yeah, we are just totally open. Some of the listeners to our show probably have heard of CFIUS. That's the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, and it's sort of the one tool to police investment from adversaries. But actually, I already got to walk back that word. It's not even policing investment. It's policing certain kinds of transactions. So it doesn't. It's not a tool for stopping greenfield investment, right? When the Chinese want to come here and just build a brand new greenfield factory site, CFIUS is not a tool. It fights covered transactions, is the word, that would involve foreign control over sensitive data, access rights, that kind of thing. I mean, if there's no holistic screening, it's very reactionary process. Somebody has to complain, so it's pretty limited.
I think we need our friends in Congress to step up and do something. I mean, essentially, both with trade and with this investment angle, we are woefully unprepared to deal with today's world, and we've essentially allowed every other country, every other business, everybody else to dictate our future. What businesses and jobs we're going to have in America, what we're going to make. We're wholly dependent on other people's decisions for this. And again, we're talking about when it's nations like China in buying land next to our military bases are investing. They are America's pork producer, right? They control our entire pork supply chain now. These aren't necessarily friendly people. It's not quite like having the British come on over here. We share a lot of cultural values with them, and we share a shared view of the world. China does not share our view of the world, and these investments can be weaponized against us very quickly, can't they? And that's what CFIUS is not doing. That's what we're not looking at, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's exactly right. This is kind of new. It wasn't a big problem in America's history. Like, even, the American Protective League, and part of their statement of principles was, we welcome foreign investment from friendly countries. Like, come on in. If you can build a better widget, you are free to compete in our market and pay American wages and, compete on that level ground. But no, I mean, now that we've fallen to the part, we fall into the low, right? I mean, in the 19th century, it was Britain was the dominant economic power, and then by 1900 we became the world's factory. But it's like you said, it's the investment now. It's not coming from Europe or other democracies. The new world's factory is China, and we do not want their investment.
That's right. They've taken our dollars. They've weaponized them already in their country. Now they're weaponizing against it in our country. We need to stop funding them, and we need Congress to step up and tighten these laws. Well, thank you for all of that excellent insight, Chuck. I want to pivot to a little bit of another topic here. Actually, something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, metal manufacturing. I think some of the listeners know that my family has a metal fabrication and machining business. We support supply chains and all kinds of things, from coat racks to missile defense to jets and airplanes to automotive. And, it's pretty diverse. But I've seen the ups and downs personally of what's gone on in trade in the last 30 years and how it's impacted American businesses and American producers and our workers, how it's impacted their wages and their wage stagnation. But, I'm really pleased, though. Honestly, President Trump in his first term and President Biden thereafter and President Trump again have really kind of, embraced tariffs. President Trump, the second term, even more than anybody. I got to give the man credit. He's absolutely doing this in a big way, and he's right to do it. What is CPA's take on metal tariffs? How are they working out these 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum? What do you see, Chuck?
Yeah, so there's two big changes to the metal tariffs this year. Just weeks of the president being into office, they got rid of all of those exemptions that were totally gutting the metal actions, turning them into Swiss cheese. So all those country exemptions and product exclusions were tossed. That was great, and they just brought it back to 25% across the board. Now, look, we know at CPA, 25% is overwhelmingly a revenue tariff. Maybe for heavy trucks, we'll see some protective effect, but generally speaking, you set a tariff of 25%. the imports will continue to flow, and the government will make some money, and that's great. It's a good form of tax revenue. But if the goal is protection and to protect the home market, then 25% typically doesn't cut it. So in June, they increased it to 50%. All right, so that now we're talking, right? Well, yes and no. Yes, for our big steel mills, right? So Cleveland Cliffs, Nucor, U.S. Steel. If and I think in terms of the tariff schedule, it's Chapter 72 for the big steel articles, and that's great. That it's now we're into a protective tariff, and they're ramping up capacity and output, and that's what we want. So that's really good. On the aluminum side, we've got Century Aluminum is like sort of the one all American smelter. And they're also doing really well, very profitable. But on both steel and aluminum, the situation's not the same on the fabricators. So when they switched the tariff to 50% for June, they did it in a really funky way, which is like only a tariff on the content, and frankly, it's full of loopholes. And on those fabricated downstream products, that's where it's not stopping. Even if, in fact, in many cases, tariffing only the metal content at 50% resulted in a product having a tariff cut versus 25% on the full value.
I want to highlight that, Chuck, because, the steel mill doesn't just want to have a steel mill just to have a steel mill, right? And that's not what America wants either. We want those downstream products. It's the stuff that they make out of the steel. It's the stuff that they make out of aluminum. That's where we get the jobs and the growth. So I'm glad to see that we're getting it at the beginning of the supply chain, but we need to protect the whole supply chain. And there needs to be a more thoughtful scheme applied to that, in my opinion, so that we can get, downstream producers like me buying the metal because we can actually produce the product profitably. That's where we get the jobs. That's where we get the employment pop from. We've only got about a minute here, but Andrew, your economic modeling, you've done some work on this. How does it translate into real jobs on the ground when we get tariffs right?
When we get tariffs right, it leads to direct impacts both for U.S. producers and U.S. jobs. And this is exactly what we saw in 2018 after the original steel tariffs. We saw steel capacity utilization go from about 70% to over 80%. And this gets in the actual sustainable pricing range that U.S. steel plants need to be at. And so this leads to direct new jobs for these steel manufacturers. But economic modeling has also shown there's a huge multiplier effect where you get, for every one steel job, you get 7 additional jobs in suppliers, downstream industries, like local businesses. And this is a huge multiplier for the entire economy.
That's right. I've seen it personally. These are the kind of jobs, I'm the downstream jobs, and then the people we hire, our accountants, our lawyers, and my people go out to eat at the local restaurant. I mean, that's the multiplier effect. And a lot of people, they don't think about it, but manufacturing has the highest multiplier of any industry. That's why these jobs are so valuable. They not only pay above the average, but they have this economic multiplier that just results in a whole healthy economy. That's why every economy in the world that wants to grow and become prosperous targets manufacturing, and we're doing it finally in America. So I'm so happy to talk with you about these policies. We've got a quick commercial break coming up here. This is the Chairman's Countdown. I'm Zach Mottl, and we are coming to you on Home Talk USA Radio Network. When we come back, we'll carry on talking a little bit about tariffs with Chuck, and we'll get into some enforcement and opportunities with Chuck and Andrew. So talk to you shortly, everybody.
Hi, this is a training pull-up for little boys, and it's a great product to use. It makes it easy for the parent and the child when learning how to potty train. The coolest part about the product is that you don't have to take the child's pants all the way down every time that they need to use the restroom. You can just open this part here, and the child can tinkle through here, and it makes it easy for the parent and the child. It's a great product, and I cannot wait until it hits the market.
Hello, welcome back to the Chairman's Countdown. I'm your host, Zach Mottl, chairman of the Coalition for a Prosperous America, the only group representing exclusively domestic producers and workers. And we are streaming to you live at hometalkusa.com and all across America on your AM radio. Earlier in the show, we talked a little bit about beef. We talked about generic drugs. We talked about metal manufacturing and tariffs and the opportunity that we have in America to bring these jobs back and increase our national security while we're at it. What's not to like about it? We had Andrew Reichenberg, our economist at CPA, and Charles Benoit, our trade counsel, on, and they're both back here for this closing segment today. Andrew, I want to start with you. I want to look forward to the future. We talked a little bit about some bad policy in the past and the ways we can do it better, but what's your biggest takeaway as we head into 2026? What do you see happening in terms of domestic production and economics in America?
Heading into 2026, I think that we're already starting to see some of the initial impacts of trade policy in 2025. For example, the August trade data just recently came out, and we saw a 24% drop in the trade deficit month to month. And this is largely driven by a huge drop-off in imports, with $18.6 billion overall drop in imports. This is directly for many U.S. producers, but right now it's often not sufficient. Right now, this has been a very broad approach, and I think moving forward, what we should be looking forward to is a very product-by-product, sector-specific approach to really bring a lot more direct help to U.S. producers. I think in the meantime, it's also important to note that we do have a bit of a cost of living crisis coming on. We have inflation that's rising month to month, and some of the main factors here have been housing, food, and energy. These are not tariff-related sectors. For example, in August, non-fuel import prices only rose 0.4%, while overall inflation was around 3%. But this is an important crisis to look forward moving forward and how it's going to affect different U.S. households as costs across the sector are starting to rise.
Yeah, and this is something we talk about all the time at CPA. And when we worry about inflation, we talk about inflation. You have to realize there's two sides of that coin, right? There's too much money chasing not enough goods, and so it's driving prices up. But the other thing we can do is we can increase the sources of supply, can't we? And if we increase the sources of supply, that can be a mitigation on inflation by having more places to buy these from, more competition within our marketplace. And so that's, some of what we talk about at CP, why we want to get more producers making these things in America. But we could also change the job thing, right? We can raise people's wages. And what the economic data shows, you tell me if I'm right or wrong, that when we have a greater percentage of our economy in manufacturing, we tend to have broadly based wage gains, where people's wages, because quite frankly, they've been stagnant since 1979 for most people. Their wages have been stagnant. They rise, costs rise. What we want to see is wages rising faster than costs. Isn't that at the root of this? Can we get at that with these kind of policies that we push here at CPA?
Absolutely. And I think that that's one of the biggest benefits of manufacturing. These are creating direct jobs in communities across the U.S., often in communities that aren't getting good jobs otherwise. And it also produces much higher paying jobs than in similar sectors, such as in the service sector or in other areas like that. These manufacturing jobs are very well paying, and they really help the economy overall. And so I think that heading into 2026, the more of that we can have, the better off we're going to be. And we also just need to pay attention to the cost of living crisis from an antitrust perspective. As we saw with beef, as we saw with pharma, a lot of these middlemen are capturing more and more margins, pushing costs up for consumers while lowering costs for production. We need to have a lot more production in the U.S., but we also need to pay attention to these costs that consumers are facing.
Yeah, that's right. We want to make sure that the people in the supply chain are adding value and not just adding costs. And I think Congress can do a lot. And to our listeners, again, you can call your congressman, you can call your representative and let them know. You ask them to address this and tell them to look at the CPA for solutions. That we've got a lot of things right here at the Coalition for Prosperous America on prosperousamerica.org. That's our website. But what about manufacturers? My favorite subject, Andrew. What about in early 2026? What do you think we'll see for manufacturers?
I think from a policy perspective, they can expect a lot more engagement from a trade policy perspective. We're seeing the inclusion rounds, for example, for steel and aluminum getting a lot of ground. U.S. producers are able to give direct input to the U.S. government. And I think that this is going to become more and more important going forward. As our trade policy becomes more specific and product dependent, the U.S. government really needs this input from U.S. producers to know what's happening on the ground, to know what is needed to encourage both U.S. investment, U.S. jobs. And so I think that heading into early 2026, they should expect and really push to be a lot more active in trying to set this trade policy for the U.S. And that should be leading to, in the long term, more investment, more jobs, and more production here at home.
No, I see it the same way, Andrew, but thank you for putting the data behind what I know in my heart and soul. So thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate that. And that's a perfect pivot, to Charles here and his expertise and his research. specific tariffs. I'm excited about that and about the way we used to do tariffs. Chuck, right? Didn't people used to go to businesses would go to Washington, D.C., say, hey, I make this widget and I'm seeing this going on in the marketplace and here's where I need to be profitable and this is what the tariff should be. It wasn't that complicated, was it? They just did it because that was American, right? How did that used to be done?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I love reading those old transcripts, pretty much from 1789 right up until 1934. That's how it was. The Congress, we had the Ways and Means Committee in Congress. That's the committee that does taxes and tariffs. And producers would just, make their case to Congress. And, we, the people we voted, elected, our legislators who are supposed to, figure out tax policy, they would hear them out and they would mix it, the revenue needs and the protection needs, where it made sense to have a revenue tariff, where it made sense for a protection tariff. So that's what we got to get back to. And the inclusion rounds have kind of started to do that. So right from 1934 until I'd say 2025, everything was litigation. You had to sue, you're dumping, you've got a subsidy and I've got some, I can prove it with economics and charts and, I'm going to take it to an independent tribunal and they will weigh the causes and assess a tariff based on the damage. And it's just everyone. It's
nonsense. I don't want that. I want somebody putting their thumb on the scale for America. That's what I want.
Exactly. So that's what we're getting back to. And the inclusion process is. We're really, we have a lot of anticipation. But the one thing, so the inclusion process is great because right now we're adding products, but we're not doing what the legislators used to do, which is actually also come up with rates that ensured the outcome for that product, right? So on the steel and aluminum, everything is just this 50%, which I alluded to earlier. It's kind of like a broken 50% when it comes to downstream. But, it used to be back in the day, you'd say, well, like first of all, we know foreign invoices. If you have a percentage-based tariff, you're just assessing it against a foreign invoice. That doesn't work. And so we come up with these
it's a big game, Chuck. We need to get back to the simple systems that built America. It's called the American system for a reason. We exported it around the world. We made other countries wealthy. We made them strong. It's time to bring it back home. This underscores everything that we're doing here at the Coalition for Prosperous America, turning it into real jobs. Thank you for being with us here today on Home Talk USA Radio. We'll be back with you again soon talking more about how to make good jobs for good people in America.